Hello, my name is Xavier. Welcome to the second video tutorial. In the last video, we spoke about the requirements and how important they are. In this one, we're going to go a bit deeper in some aspects that we just touched briefly. And this is the version control and revisions. The whole concept of this Workframe is that it's open to everybody, so everybody can collaborate and fix things or add things. In this way, when somebody has to test the Decidim installation, doesn't need to create everything from scratch. He just has to go to GitHub, download all the requirements and all the test cases already created, install them in Testlink, and begin to work with lots of stuff already done. But that implies that everything has to be open, and we have to work with something like GitHub to share all the things we do. But also, we need something inside Testlink to keep track of the changes that we can get once we upload the last requirements file. This requirement got no changes and is the first version, but let's go to another requirement, a different one, which I created just to show you the different options that you have in this version control inside Testlink. You see we have two versions and two revisions. If we hover with the mouse, we'll see the text that the last person who touched this requirement left. And the message says that this version has support for these two typical Catalan and Spanish characters, this C and this N. That's quite normal. In each release, software improve, and then we have to create new requirements or do a new version of the old requirements. Here, we create the new version and we explain what did change. If we go down below, we can see the older version of this one. Like this is the first version, but be aware that this is first version, fourth revision. So lots of things have changed from the first version. Like here it says we have included support for Japanese characters. So this is good, but not good enough, because it only shows us the last version. If we need a real good control of all the changes, then we have to go to another option. Here on top of this sort of window, we have this icon. It's called Actions. If we click here, we get another sub menu that allows us to go to a very interesting option. Let's click here, and you see here, View History. This looks much more like a version control utility. Here we can see the versions, version 2, the first version, the revisions in each version, and we can compare each one. We have this log message from the person who create these revisions. We have a timestamp here when it happened, and on the bottom we can see here we can compare the different versions. Like we want to select the first and the last, for instance, and now we get this window here on top. We can see the first version of the requirement, first version, first revision, compared with the last one, second version, second revision. We see there is a big change in the number of test cases needed. It went from up to 5. That's because of the requirement changed a lot. In the beginning, it was just a simple user, a simple login, and then it changed to a login that has to check out that you can use Japanese characters, that you can use Catalan and Spanish characters, and it's much more complicated. So you need more test cases to check it out. Here we have a link to a code. This is a link to Java code that you may use later on to launch all these tests automatically. Now we're going to make it only manual, but later on we'll make it automatically. So that's a simple control version utility. That's quite handy. We can compare both versions. Now let's go back to the main window. Okay. Obviously we can, I just compared the first and the last, but we can compare any of them. But let's close this window and go back to the requirements. Okay. So here you see it says coverage and it's empty. If we go to another requirement, you'll see that it is empty as well. Okay, coverage empty. Here we have to define which test case will be used for this requirement. Each requirement must have some test case, and each test case has to be linked to some requirements. So let's go to the test case and assign the test case to the requirements. You see now we are in the window in test specifications, and it's empty. Obviously, like in the test case and the test plan, that's the beginning. So we can create from scratch any test case, just entering a title, giving some brief description, selecting the keywords, then we click on save, then it will open another window where we can enter each step and each expected result, blah blah blah, and all this stuff. But that's precisely what we want to avoid, or at least to reduce to the minimum. The whole point of this project is to use the test cases and the requirements that other people already created. So it's much better, instead of creating all the test cases, just import all the test cases that other people has already created. So we just get out of this window, cancel, and learn how to import. Click on this icon and then select this to import all the files. It has to be an XML file, like the requirements. So we just have to click on the navigate option, which will open our folders and look for the file that we already downloaded or created. This one, remember, most of the files here that I have in my computer, I already download them from GitHub, where I have all the, there is a big repo with all the files that I already created or that other people created or modified. So let's look for this XML file and upload it here to Testlink. Okay, clicking upload. And okay, here we have a list of all the test suites that were in this file. And on the left here in this theme, we have all of them ordered like in its place already. You see, that's a lot of work that it's already done for us. And we can check out all the test case that other people created. You see, that's test case for checking out the language. And even more, we can go to GitHub and not only look for these test cases for manual testing, we can look for Java code to launch automate testing here. This is very useful, and I also create HTML files for this. All those HTML documents are quite handy if you have to share the information with other people in other departments. It's an HTML file, it's very easy to send it or mail it to people. Everybody knows how it works. So a good way to work is load the XML file with all the test cases or all the requirements, go through all of them or through the ones that you are interested, redefine or create new ones, save again as XML file for other people, and create an HTML document so you can take a look at it outside Testlink and send it to whoever may need it. Let me show you how it looks, one HTML document created straight from Testlink. Have it here. Okay. You see that you can create this kind of document from test cases and from requirements straight from Testlink. It's an option, I'll show you later on. But now here you have the end index with all the test cases that they are in this document. And through this table, it's very easy to jump from one test case to the other one and take a look at specific test cases. Here we don't have a lot of test cases, maybe there are 40, 30, but you may have 100 or even 1,000 test cases. So to have this kind of document is very useful to browse through the test cases and share it with other people and get feedback from them. You see here it's an example of test case. You have the information, the data that the test person needs to execute this test, the steps, everything he may know or she may know to execute this test cases. You can send it to product or marketing or whatever. If they agree, okay, then you can proceed to execute the test cases. Now that we have the test cases loaded, let me show you something, and let's go back to the requirements. Let me show you something which is very important, but it was empty before. Here in the requirements, let's select one requirement. That's the same one we saw before. And here on top, it says 5 test cases needed. This requirement is about how to register and navigate. Okay, in the test plan, it said every user has to be able to register and use the platform, blah, 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 whatever. From this test plan, we created some requirements. We upload these requirements, which specifies how do you register and everything. But the coverage was empty. Every requirement needs some test cases, because the execution of these test cases, it is what will validate this requirement. You will prove that this requirement is working, executing the test cases. And those test cases have to be linked with this requirement, and the requirement linked with the test cases. That's the reason why each requirement says the amount of test cases needed, and this one says at least we need 5 test cases. We have much more than 5 here. That's not a big problem. Sometimes working with different people, each one creates its own test cases, or sometimes the requirement works for different test cases, so no big deal. The problem is if we have less than 5, because then it means that we are not covering the minimum amount needed to validate this test case. If we have more test cases, we can remove just clicking here, or we can also take a look at the history of the execution of this test case. Now we'll see nothing because we didn't execute anything at all in this. But usually we will have the history of these executions. And then the last icon, this pencil, is it will show us the whole test case. So we can edit and we can take a look at how it looks and what we need. Here on top always the ID, the unique ID of this test case. See here we have all the steps needed, all the things that we have to do. It explains if it's automated, the keywords, whatever. And here you see, pay attention to these requirements. This test case is linked with these two requirements. Remember, as I said, it's very important to keep track between requirements and test cases and requirements. It's a two-way track. Every time you execute a test case, you must know which requirement are you validating. And every time you read the requirement, you must know which test cases validate this requirement. Okay, so far so good. Let's go back to the main page and remember everything we have done so far. We have a project, a test plan, which will guide us about what we have to do and where we have to do it. A build, a release, which specifies to which version belong all the test cases and everything we are doing. Now we also have the requirements. Each requirement explains how it works, a part or a function or a menu or a window of this project, and each requirement must have linked all the test cases that will prove that this requirement works. So if we select any requirement here, we must have in the coverage all the test cases that if we execute them and then they give us green, will validate this requirement. It doesn't mean that the requirement works perfect. It just means that the requirements work as it was specified. And the last thing that we did was to load all the test cases. Here we have all the test cases already loaded, each one related with its requirements. And that's all. So thanks for listening. We are over 10 minutes, and next video we'll talk about test cases. We'll go deeper in test cases and the metrics of each execution.